"You're not cleared to speak on this, Carol. You're just the project manager." That's what the VP said last quarter, loud enough for the partners team to hear, right after I flagged a vendor form that could have nuked the contract. They all laughed. Me? I muted the call, stared at my screen, and realized the 17-page compliance memo I wrote and signed was sitting in his inbox, unread, unopened, ignored like everything else I did that wasn't on a Gantt chart. And yet, 3 months later, that same VP would be begging legal to contain the narrative while the board chairman's face drained white like a fax machine running out of toner. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind to the part where everyone still thought I was furniture. They called me the glue, in that condescending, corporate therapy kind of way. Carol keeps things running. Carol's the glue. Never mind that glue doesn't get a seat at the table. Glue doesn't speak during strategy meetings. Glue just holds together the broken mess everyone else walks away from. My name's on every risk log, every vendor compliance matrix, every deadline extension that saved their bonus round. They don't remember that, of course. They remember I once corrected someone on a client call and got labeled difficult. That label stuck harder than anything I'd ever glued. Funny thing, though, I used to think that being essential meant they'd protect you, keep you in the loop, show some damn respect. But in reality, being essential just means they'll lean harder, suck you dry, and act shocked when the structure collapses the second you step away. And that's exactly what happened. But back then, I still played along. Still showed up early, logged off late, nodded politely while they brainstormed ideas I'd already implemented 2 quarters ago. Handled our risk compliance like a priest handles confession, quiet, diligent, thankless. They thought legal had it. Legal thought finance had it. Finance thought the intern with the novelty mug was doing something with spreadsheets. In truth, I was the only one with the certification required to keep our government-regulated software project from turning into a federal offense. Self-funded, by the way. I paid for the course. The exams, the yearly renewal, never got reimbursed. Never asked to be because I knew better. I knew if I waited for approval, we'd miss the deadline and someone else would end up in charge and they'd screw it sideways. I kept a binder, read, label maker tabs, monthly logs, vendor compliance checks, self-attestations, email trails, signature matrices, every signature dated, every deviation flagged. No one asked for it. No one knew to ask, but I kept it anyway. Because one day I suspected I knew. Someone would try to blame me, and when that day came, I wouldn't argue. I'd just forward the damn binder. Anyway, that's the thing about stories like mine. They don't start with a bang. They start with a sigh, a calendar invite, a quick sync. And before you know it, you're up to your neck in institutional incompetence with a VP who thinks a compliance matrix is a type of coffee machine. Speaking of keeping things running, if you've made it this far and you're still listening, do me a favor, tap that like button and subscribe. It keeps the stories flowing and motivates the team more than any VP's passive-aggressive emoji in Slack ever did. Seriously, this whole mess was powered by caffeine, trauma, and your support. Back to the story. At the time, we were knee-deep in a government tech rollout. Big money, big scrutiny. The kind of contract where the wrong initials on a PDF could cost you your operating license. Naturally, everyone treated it like a branding opportunity. Custom slide decks, new headshots. The VP got himself a logo hoodie. Meanwhile, I was triple-checking vendor credentials and quietly rejecting procurement requests that violated Section 9.4B of our operating agreement. And nobody noticed. Not until the day came when someone did. That day started like every other. Spilled coffee, crashing VPN, and a 7:30 a.m. fire drill that was just a calendar typo. The partner was on Zoom. Their compliance officer had a question, routine really. Who oversees your internal risk compliance tracking for this rollout? The VP unmuted and smiled. Legal handles that, I blinked. The legal lead, looking caught off guard, coughed. Oh, well, I believe finance has the documentation. Finance lead, that's not our department. 3 seconds of silence. Then, partner's compliance officer said my name. Carol, do you have insight into this? I nodded. Yes, I do. The VP cut in, smirking like a bad sitcom villain. You're just the project manager, Carol. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Apologize for the confusion. In front of the partner, in front of their entire team, in front of a junior staffer who once asked me if we needed to renew Excel. I stared at the screen for 1 second too long. Then I said, understood. Muted myself, not out of shame, out of strategy. That was the last meeting I attended before everything burned. There's a special kind of silence that happens when a man in a logo vest publicly humiliates you on a video call. Not the awkward, cringy kind, no, this was colder. Thicker. The kind of silence that makes people glance sideways at their webcams and pretend to sip coffee just to avoid being seen witnessing something they know is wrong but won't dare to name. That's the silence that followed the VP's voice slicing through the call like a paper cut. Carol, you're just the project manager. Apologize to him. He didn't even blink. Just leaned back like he delivered some sage business wisdom instead of dousing a gas leak in ego. The him in question was Nate, a mid-level striver with good hair, bad instincts, and a LinkedIn page that read like it was written by ChatGPT on cocaine. Nate had screwed up. Royally. A simple partner handoff, botched beyond belief. He'd sent the wrong files to the wrong team, left our licensing terms exposed, and then panicked and ghosted the follow-up. I fixed it, quietly, like always. But instead of thanking the person who stopped a contractual bloodbath, the VP decided it was more important to preserve Nate's fragile ego, which apparently meant demanding a woman in her 40s apologize to a man-child who still called his mother mommy in public. I remember the way the partner's compliance officer raised an eyebrow. I remember the slight twitch in the vendor rep's cheek. And I remember the way I didn't say a damn word in protest. I just said, understood, muted my mic, smiled, and something in me calcified. That's the moment people always get wrong. They think it's the shouting match that defines you, the desk pounding, the how dare you drama. But no, the real shift happens in silence, when humiliation doesn't spark a flame but freezes something to the core. Like when lake water suddenly turns to ice beneath your feet and you realize you're the only one who knows it's about to crack. Because I wasn't just the project manager. I was the firewall, last line of defense between their negligence and a regulatory meat grinder. And they didn't even know what they'd done. I turned off my camera, walked to the kitchen, stirred a spoonful of instant coffee into hot water like I was mixing poison. My hands didn't shake. They were too numb for that, not from fear, from familiarity. This wasn't the first time I'd been stepped on in the name of team dynamics. It was just the first time I decided not to mop it up afterward. I didn't finish the meeting. Let the VP bask in his self-congratulations. Let Nate stumble through jargon he barely understood. Let them all pretend nothing had happened, that I hadn't been publicly reduced to a mascot. Later that day, I checked our compliance dashboard. Outdated, unmaintained. The partner had uploaded a new annex that no one had reviewed. Our risk register was missing 3 required data points. No one had touched the Q3 audit trail in 6 weeks. Legal hadn't logged in since June. It would have taken one click from that partner's compliance team to see the gaps. One nudge to trigger a vendor audit. And when that happened, the house of cards wouldn't just fall, it'd slice open every finger that ever touched it. But they didn't know that. Because for 3 years, I had been the glue. I had taped, patched, duct taped, zip-tied our compliance framework together with no help, no resources, and no recognition. And they just ordered the glue to apologize to the scissors. I pulled the red binder from my shelf, the one I'd kept at home just in case. Labeled, tabbed, annotated like a serial killer's diary but neater. Inside, every policy exception, every flagged vendor, every "will fix this later" item they thought had vanished into the void. I flipped to the October tab, the form Nate had butchered. My corrected version, signed, time-stamped, annotated with the clause he'd violated. I stared at it for a while, then I closed the binder. And I smiled for real this time, not out of pride, out of certainty. Because now I knew exactly what they didn't. And I knew the silence that would follow was going to be a hell of a lot louder. I sat on the edge of my couch that night, glass of wine untouched. The TV playing some home renovation, rerun where happy couples tear out drywall and pretend they aren't one exposed beam away from divorce. My laptop sat open in front of me, the call replaying in my head like a bad laugh track. "You're just the project manager. Apologize to him." I mouthed it in sync with the memory. It hit harder the second time, maybe because there was no one else around to smirk and shrug it off like workplace banter. It wasn't banter. It's a warning shot. I pulled the red binder from the shelf like it was holy scripture. Leather spine, label maker precision, color-coded tabs. This thing was my secret weapon and my resignation letter rolled into one. Inside was the truth, not the truth they passed around in their quarterly updates, but the one that lived between the deadlines where compliance either existed or it didn't. Tab 1, risk assessments, signed, time-stamped, archived. Tab 2, vendor onboarding logs, most of them personally reviewed by me after legal bailed 3/4 in. Tab 3, audit trails, complete, unbroken, and updated every month like clockwork. Tab 4, certifications mine, current, verified, paid out of pocket. I flipped to the last page of the training credential I renewed in April. Still valid. Still the only one in the org with a name under Authorized Officer for Risk Sign-Off Section 17.3b. My name. And only my name. Then it hit me like a late power bill. They didn't even know if we were still certified. The VP hadn't once asked. Legal never followed up. The CFO had once replied to my quarterly compliance update with a thumbs-up emoji. The same guy who once told me, "We love having you here. You're a real team player." Yeah? Then why was I the only one holding the line while they played corporate beer pong on Slack? I closed the binder and stared at the wall, not angry, just aware. Aware that everything I'd built to keep the company out of trouble had become invisible. I was the seatbelt they forgot existed until the crash. And now they'd unbuckled me on purpose. Here's where I tell you I plotted revenge, that I fantasized about burning it all down, leaving them to twist in regulatory purgatory. But that wasn't it. It wasn't rage anymore. It was clarity. Let me be honest. I wrestled with it. Loyalty doesn't vanish overnight. It dies quietly, like a fluorescent bulb flickering until you stop noticing the buzz. I asked myself, do I protect the company despite the VP? Despite the disrespect, the gaslighting, the public call-out? Or do I let the structure collapse under its own negligence? Let them see exactly what they built, a fragile machine duct taped together by someone they refused to acknowledge. And then I thought about Nate, about the way he smirked on that call, sipping from his stupid rise and grind mug while I muted myself in shame. The same Nate who once asked me to resend a file because his tabs were full. The same Nate who now had the VP's ear and a seat I'd never been offered, no matter how many times I bailed them out of a fine, a warning, a federal inquiry. I thought about all the other Carols out there, holding up broken systems with nothing but stubbornness and spreadsheet tabs, watching as less qualified men were handed the reins to their life's work. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the record to show, so I picked one file, just one, the most recent compliance matrix, annotated, redlined, with a note at the bottom, certification status, pending renewal, only one credentialed manager listed. No subject line, no message, just forwarded it to the external auditors we contracted with every quarter, the ones who always asked if anything had changed. This time, I decided not to lie for them, because silence is one thing, but covering for people who'd throw you under a bus just to hear the tires pop, that's not loyalty, that's self-harm in a blazer. So I hit send, closed the laptop, and finished my wine. No rage, no vengeance, just quiet, clean exposure. Let the facts speak. Let the silence scream. The cursor hovered over the send button like it was wired to a detonator. Except there was no explosion coming. No fiery finale, no war cry, just delivery, one email, one file, one quiet end to a very long lie. The compliance matrix sat open on my screen, its tab name glowing like an exit sign. It wasn't dramatic, no top secret intel, no hidden codes, just a spreadsheet. A boring, color-coded, ruthlessly detailed spreadsheet that outlined every compliance element our project was supposed to meet. Vendor assessments? Done by me. Internal audits? Logged by me. Policy exception tracking, updated by me. Signatures, one name, over and over and over again, Carol R. Hendricks. That's the part that always got me. They assumed the system worked because they didn't see the duct tape. They assumed we were compliant because no one had told them otherwise. And they assumed anyone else was watching the gate. They were wrong. At the bottom of the matrix in red text I'd added 2 weeks ago, right after I renewed my credential, was the line, certification status, pending renewal, only one credentialed manager listed. No names, no accusations, just a quiet truth that would ring louder than any whistleblower complaint. It's funny, I didn't feel powerful. I felt hollow, like I'd handed in a resignation letter written in math. All those years of building a safety net they thought was automatic, and I just pulled back the curtain to reveal it was one woman with a binder and a nightmare for detail. I attached the file, addressed it to Audit at caropartners.com, the inbox for our contracted compliance firm. No message, no subject line, just the file, click send. And just like that, it was no longer mine to carry. There was no cinematic sting, no thunder in the distance, just the soft swoosh of an outgoing email and the instant peace that follows doing the exact right thing, even if it meant watching the walls fall afterward. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. Crying would have meant I still wanted them to care. I didn't. I'd let go of wanting that sometime between the third time I corrected the VP on a compliance clause and the first time he took credit for my risk mitigation roadmap. I didn't want credit anymore. I wanted accuracy. Let the file speak. Let the audit firm ask the right questions. Let legal open their inbox and realize the canary's song was backed up in triplicate. It wasn't even revenge, it was an audit trail, and I knew what would happen next. First, it'd ignore it, pretend it was nothing. Maybe even laugh it off, oh, Carol just being overly thorough again. Then they'd open it, realize what they were looking at, then panic, then scramble, then call. But that was later. Right now, I made myself a cup of tea. No wine tonight, wine was for grief. This was different. This was a resignation without quitting. A trigger pulled on bureaucracy itself. Let them find the bullet in their inbox. I checked my email once more. Just once, still nothing from the VP. No follow-up, no apology. Not even a Slack message pretending we were aligned. I logged out, turned off notifications, and took a walk outside. The autumn wind hit my face like a reset button. The leaves hadn't asked for the change, but they let go anyway. Maybe I was finally learning how to do the same. Let go. Let truth circulate. Let the matrix breathe. Because this wasn't a threat. This wasn't a message. It was a mirror, and soon they were going to have to look into it, whether they wanted to or not. The email came in at 9:04 a.m. Tuesday. Subject line, clarification requested risk compliance certification and matrix attribution. No greeting, no exclamation points. Just the crisp, calculated tone of people who don't guess, they verify. That's how auditors operate, like sharks with clipboards. They don't roar. They circle slowly. The first question was innocent enough. Could you confirm who maintains the compliance matrix for the GOVX integration project? The VP responded confidently. His reply CC'd to legal, to HR, to some poor junior associate who'd been in the company for 3 weeks and probably thought compliance was a brand of printer paper. Our legal department maintains all formal compliance matrices. This file may be a working draft from an outdated system. No action required. Classic, brush it off, downplay. Assume the auditor won't press. Assume the system's too big to fail and too boring to question. I made my tea, trimmed a few dead leaves off the hydrangeas, and waited. 90 minutes later, second email. Per our previous engagements, legal's internal documentation does not match this format. Could you confirm the identity of the signatory listed throughout? The VP replied again, this time slightly more clipped. We are reviewing internally and will provide clarification by end of week. This is likely legacy documentation. Translation, stall. Hope it goes away. Hope the sharks circle elsewhere. Except they don't. By Thursday, the questions had doubled. Why is only one credentialed name listed? Has the company's certification lapsed for any portion of Q3? Is the individual listed still employed and in what capacity? That's when legal started sweating. They looped in compliance. Compliance looped in procurement. Procurement naturally looped in me, or at least they tried. I was on PTO. An out-of-office auto-reply greeted them with warm, passive-aggressive cheer. Hello, I'll be unavailable this week. For all compliance-related questions, please refer to your designated team lead. Best, Carol. No follow-ups, no calls. I left my work phone in a drawer next to expired warranties and forgotten thumb drives. I wasn't on vacation. I wasn't hiding. I was simply not participating in the game anymore. Instead, I watered the garden, deadheaded the lavender, pulled weeds from between bricks I'd laid myself in the spring. The kind of work that talks back with results, unlike the kind of work where your victories are erased by the next guy's louder voice. Let them figure it out. Let them squint at the matrix I built line by line while they were busy workshopping jargon. Let them ask who logged the Q2 certification timestamp or who updated the regulatory change tracker on April 14th at 1:08 p.m. When half the company was at a rooftop happy hour celebrating a product launch, I'd restructured from scratch. Let them stare at my initials in every log, every field, every audit trail, and ask each other, wait, Carol did all of this? I didn't need to say a word. The system spoke for me, because when you build something right, it leaves fingerprints. The VP tried damage control, called it a misunderstanding, said it was an internal miscommunication, even tried to blame an old contractor from a year ago. But the auditors, they weren't buying it. Sent a final request on Friday, a full list of credentialed compliance officers for the past 2 years. It was a short list. One name, they didn't even need to highlight it. While legal scrambled, while HR sent panicked teams messages about optics and response cadence, I sat on my porch, watching a squirrel try to cram an entire peanut butter cracker into its cheeks. I didn't smile. I just breathed. The air felt different when you weren't pretending anymore, and the burden of being invisible had finally shifted to those who chose not to see. They wanted a world where compliance was magic. What they got was a world where magic required a magician. And the magician was gone. The report landed Monday morning at 7:46 a.m., timestamped and sealed with the kind of bureaucratic finality that makes grown men clutch their title plaques like rosaries. No pleasantries, no buffer paragraphs, just facts, lined up like bullets. Subject, GovX compliance status. Immediate review recommended. The board's inboxes lit up like a power surge. Red flags, yellow alerts. Phrases like potential breach of contract, insufficient internal controls, and failure to maintain multi-party oversight screamed through the executive summary. One line blistered the room before legal even had a chance to breathe. Company's risk compliance maintained by one certified individual, now listed as inactive. That sentence was a guillotine, and heads were already in the basket before coffee was poured. The board chairman, a man who wore $600 shoes and referred to quarterly losses as hiccups, leaned back in his leather chair, stared at the printout, and asked the question that would echo through the week like a fire alarm with dead batteries. Who signed the Q3 documentation? The room froze, legal blinked. The VP, suddenly pale, opened his mouth, then shut it again. His tongue might have been corporate steel, but in that moment it was rusting. The junior counsel cleared her throat. Will need to verify. The chairman didn't flinch. You're not verifying, you're confirming. And that's when it began. The scramble. Click-clack of keyboards, the whispered sidebars, the passive-aggressive forwarding of email threads with vague subject lines like FWD, follow-up risk notes. The file was pulled. The logs opened. Sign-in credentials traced. All roads led back to me. Carol R. Hendricks, one name, one ID, every audit log, every compliance approval, every digital signature. Q1, Q2, Q3, me. I was the ghost in their machine. The invisible wall they leaned against for years without once checking for cracks. And now the wall was gone and they were falling. It wasn't even dramatic. No one screamed. No one flipped tables. It was worse than that. It was quiet. That boardroom kind of quiet, where power stares at its own reflection and doesn't recognize the face looking back. Someone finally muttered, did she even have the authority to sign off? To which legal responded, she was the only one with the certification. Silence again. Then a question whispered like a confession, how long? A beat passed. Then another voice, compliance this time, trying to sound brave. 3 years, maybe more. There's documentation. Yes, there was, you're welcome. I was 47 miles away in a grocery store flower aisle, choosing between marigolds and mums. I had no idea the report had dropped, or that legal was already 4 meetings deep into a disaster recovery strategy built entirely around pretending they hadn't made the mistake, they just hadn't noticed it. The board chair would later describe the situation as deeply unfortunate. The VP would call it a systems oversight. HR would send out a morale memo reminding employees that everyone contributes to our success. None of them could answer the question that mattered most: who is currently certified? And the answer? No one. I had taken nothing with me but my name, and suddenly that name wasn't just on a spreadsheet, it was the spreadsheet. The foundation, the signature, the firewall, the proof, and now it was listed as inactive. The chairman leaned forward, voice like gravel wrapped in silk. Fix this, quietly, now. But it was already too late for quiet. The auditors had spoken. The partner had been CC'd. And somewhere in the building, a procurement lead was whispering, "Wait, Carol's not here anymore? Welcome to the new world, boys, where your entire regulatory defense just walked out with a houseplant and PTO balance." By Tuesday, the building reeked of panic. Not the usual kind: budget reforecasting, client churn, or some intern tweeting the CEO's Slack messages. This was existential. Legal had a war room set up by 9 a.m. with a whiteboard full of questions nobody could answer, dry erase markers bleeding under pressure. People were double knotting their loafers like they were about to storm Normandy. The contracts team, normally smug and shielded by NDAs like medieval armor, froze when the first notice hit. Subject: pending compliance clarification suspension of deliverables. One of our 3 largest vendors had hit pause. They weren't being cute about it either. They wanted an assurance letter signed by an actively certified compliance officer. A very specific line in the GOVX contract required it quarterly. Failure to provide one triggered a breach clause. Penalties escalated daily. Someone in legal tried drafting a workaround. The auditor responded, "We cannot accept an internal memo from an uncertified individual." Q Phase 2 of corporate apocalypse. The trading partner, issued a formal letter within hours. 4 pages, structured like a breakup email with bullet points. They weren't accusing anyone yet, but they were deeply concerned and exploring contingencies if compliance integrity couldn't be restored by end of week. That's government speak for, "We're already interviewing your replacements." The VP called an emergency all hands, not the kind with donuts or team spirit. This one had folders. This one had sweat. He strutted in like he had a script. "Let's all stay calm. This is a temporary hiccup, just red tape and miscommunication. We're working closely with our partners to resolve it." A junior compliance assistant, bless her stunned little soul, raised her hand and asked the question that shattered the illusion like a champagne flute dropped off a balcony. "Wait, Carol's gone?" The room went dead silent. Every head turned. VP blinked like someone had just asked him to recite the alphabet backward. Then came the wave. One manager: "Who's covering her approvals?" Another: "Did anyone take over her binder access?" Someone in the back: "Where even is her binder?" Eyes darted across the table like bullets. HR opened their laptop with trembling fingers, clicking through org charts and old onboarding decks. Legal rifled through files like the answers were printed on magic scrolls. No one found anything, because I hadn't left anything. Not out of malice, out of habit. Because for years they treated me like a safety net, and safety nets don't leave instruction manuals. The VP tried a bluff, classic move. "This is still under control. Let's not overreact. We can appoint someone else to sign off and backdate the cert." Nope. Legal interrupted, a little too fast. "We are not retroactively falsifying sign-offs for federal documentation." He froze. A junior lawyer leaned in, whispering like it was a spell that might wake the kraken. "Carol signed the last 3 quarters. If we touch that paper trail, we're not just in breach, we're in violation." You could hear the gulp. The panic wasn't loud. It was ambient, phones buzzing, Slack lighting up like Morse code for "oh no." Legal drafted an internal advisory: no one speaks to press, to clients, or God forbid on LinkedIn. All decks need approval. All meetings require recording. Someone whispered that an investor had requested a call. Someone else said the board was meeting early. Someone else said she's not even answering her texts. I was at a local nursery, elbow deep in soil, comparing shades of coral bells. My phone sat face down in the passenger seat of my car, still on silent. The PTO was real, and I had never used it more deliberately. Let them scramble. Let them marvel. Let them come to terms with the fact that every deadline they met, every audit they passed, every contract they renewed under the illusion of stability, was carried on one woman's back. One woman they publicly told to apologize. Let them remember the words. Let them taste them again and again. "You're just the project manager." That sentence? It aged like milk in the sun. The call came at 6:11 p.m., just as the sun dipped behind the neighbor's maple tree and turned my kitchen window into a stained glass sermon. My hands were wet, mid-rinse, washing the clay off a set of gardening shears I'd spent the afternoon sharpening. I saw the number flash across the screen: corporate line, masked extension, and didn't even need to answer to know who it was. I dried my hands slowly. Let it ring twice more, then I picked up. Carol, it's Thomas, the board chairman. Voice like a piano falling down a marble staircase, polished but impossible to ignore. He didn't bother with pleasantries. We both knew this wasn't a courtesy call. We didn't know he started. The words heavy, deliberate, like bricks laid into a foundation too late to save the house. We assumed systems were in place. That the team had, you assumed wrong, I said quietly. Silence on his end, not defensive, just exposed. I won't waste your time, he continued. Requesting you return, temporarily, just until we stabilize. He used the word like it was medicine, as if the system was sick and I was the last functioning organ. I let him speak, let him plead through corporate euphemisms and manufactured grace. The tone was respectful now, too late and too clean. You built something essential. We didn't recognize it, he added. Still, I didn't answer. I walked to the sink, turned off the faucet. The drip stopped. The room was quiet. I could hear a bird calling outside, dusk settling in like a truth no one could spin. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Did you find my replacement? There was a pause, a shift in air. We're working on it, he said. That was the moment. Not a scream, not a fight, not a dramatic hanging up. Just the soft click of my finger pressing the red circle. The simplest sound in the world. Call ended. I set the phone down, exhaled, not satisfaction. Not vengeance, just air. They thought I'd be grateful to be wanted again. That I'd melt under the apology like butter on a boardroom bagel. That being seen, finally seen, was all I ever craved. But I didn't want a parade, I wanted proof, and all they had was panic, because now the story wasn't what I'd done. It was what they hadn't noticed, hadn't supported, hadn't asked. They'd built a palace on a single nail and acted shocked when the roof caved in. I poured a glass of water, sat on the porch, watched the wind move through the birch trees like a rumor only I understood. They could scramble, they could beg, they could build a task force and hire 5 consultants to piece together what I held in my red binder for free. But they'd never replicate it, because they didn't just lose a certification. They lost the only person who cared enough to understand why it mattered. Let them work on it. Let them chase ghosts through expired credentials and out-of-date templates. I was no longer in their system. But the system still had my fingerprints. And now that they'd seen what happens when I stop holding the weight, they'd never forget what it felt like to fall. They sat around the emergency table like generals after a lost war, sleeves rolled up, laptops open, the illusion of control hanging by a single Ethernet cable. The room wasn't hot, but people were sweating. Legal had called the meeting. That alone was enough to make the CFO's left eye twitch. The presentation was already on the screen when the chairman walked in. Title: Regulatory Certification Gaps Urgent Remediation. That's the sanitized name for we just discovered the entire operation was balanced on one ignored woman's spine. The head of legal, a man known for his poker face and laminated buzzwords, cleared his throat. We've completed the internal review. I'll be blunt, no one moved. No one else in this company holds an active compliance certification that meets the requirements of our federal contracts under GOVX standards. Not in risk, not in legal, not in procurement. He clicked to the next slide. A bullet point lit up like a confession. Active certification. 1 Carol R. Hendricks inactive status as of Monday, 9:00 a.m. You could hear the board chair's jaw clench. He leaned forward, palms flat on the table like he was holding it down to keep it from floating away. Tell me she wasn't the only one, he said, voice low, slow, every syllable weighted like a gavel. Legal didn't answer. The silence was the answer. Someone exhaled through their nose. The CFO muttered, Jesus Christ. The VP, pale now, stared into his tablet as if a different truth might suddenly load. It didn't. His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in his career, he had no jargon to hide behind, because the truth was simple. One line, unsexy, unforgivable. Carol was the only one. For 3 years, she'd been the firewall between their laziness and a federal audit. For 3 years, she'd filed, signed, documented, and verified under their noses while they made her apologize for existing. And now she was gone. Outside the boardroom, whispers flew like paper airplanes. HR was in damage control. Investors were asking for visibility. Vendor reps were suddenly unavailable for comment. One particularly anxious junior manager asked if the project could pivot to a non-regulated framework. He was escorted out of the meeting for suggesting it. Meanwhile, miles away, I sat on my back patio in an old hoodie with a chipped mug of coffee. The voicemail blinked red on my phone screen. Carol, it's Thomas again. We'd like to revisit our offer. The board is prepared to make this right. Just give us a call. Delete, no anger, just done. My inbox dinged, new message. Subject, consulting opportunity confidential body. Carol, we were referred to you as a subject matter expert. We're offering a 6-month consulting role to oversee risk compliance restructure. $240,000. Remote, full autonomy. Let us know your terms. I read it twice. Smirked. Typed one line back. Only if I get to pick who apologizes first. Send. Set the mug down. Let the wind roll through the trees. I wasn't rebuilding their house, but I damn well invoiced them for the blueprint. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the coffee pot strikes again.